2D in a modern Sonic title has never been something I have appreciated or desired. Once upon a time, a 2D game was a 2D game, and a 3D game was a 3D game. And when Sonic Generations originally released, even though I liked the game a lot more back then, I still distinctly remember being very disappointed that with the game already being split into half 2D through Classic Sonic, modern Sonic was still 2D as well. Every modern Sonic stage had 2D sections, which effectively meant that Generations was 75% 2D and only 25% 3D. And surprisingly enough, 3D was the thing I enjoyed the most when it came to that game. So here we are many years later with Sonic and Shadow Generations. In between that game and the old Generations, there's been numerous other modern Sonic games, and they've all relied on 2D sections to a varying degree, and my opinion was not changed throughout any of that. But does this game do anything different? The answer is yes, it does. This game still follows the 2-act structure with the modern 3D act first and then the classic 2D act second, except with this game you're Shadow all the time, so there's no split in character, and the first act remains fully 3D for the entire runtime, just like a level from, let's say, Sonic Adventure would have done. That is something we haven't seen since Sonic 06. That's how long it's been since we've had a modern game that didn't split itself into a 2D section, and it feels great. There was a concern amongst some, a reasonable concern, that by going back to a 3D game with the boost still enabled, we would have extremely short missions. But the counter to that argument is games like Sonic Forces already were extremely short, and they used 2D sections a lot to pad them out. Though they did have the odd level that remained fully 3D, it wasn't impressive. Here though, not only are we fully 3D, but the levels are also as long as games around the early 2000s, with consistently good branching level design, where you've got multiple paths, some are faster, some are harder, some have more secrets, and some are easier. It's great, it's absolutely amazing to play through, and I really do encourage you to replay these missions more than once so that you can see the multiple differences per run. But okay, that's all well and good that I liked the 3D sections for being 3D and expansive, but the problem we illustrated at the beginning was that the 2D sections were intrusive and a letdown on a gameplay level. Well, again, that's not the case in Shadow Generations. Act 2 is mostly a 2D only affair, but they still give you creative level design with their high paths, low paths, and all that stuff. On top of this, their runtime is a good length as well, usually comparable to the 3D level, but it doesn't feel like a drag, which some games unfortunately made the 2D sections just feel like slower slogs compared to the action-paced 3-dimension gameplay. Here, thanks to Shadow's Chaos abilities, they remain interesting. Chaos Control opens and closes many routes, and Chaos Spear is actually used a fair bit as well to help differentiate some of the paths you're going to be taking. Overall, Shadow Generations manages to finally blend 3D and 2D gameplay without making one of them detract from the other. It took them a decade plus to do it, but I do think this is an achievement. My preference remains to be 3D games, 3D levels, but for once I have no problem with 2D being included in the games going forward if they're done like this, where they don't intrude on 3D levels and we still get 3D levels of good length and of good quantity, but then we get these well-designed and, I'll admit, challenging 2D levels on top of that. Perfectly done. The only aspect I think I can truly draw up a criticism, and I must reiterate this is a small, minor criticism, is the 3D acceleration. In the 3D stages, Shadow has a far smoother transition from his slower state to his quicker state compared to other boost games, but in your slowest form, getting started feels as if you're underwater or pushing up against a block. Of course, a tap of the boost button fixes this, but sometimes you'll notice in a platforming section where boosting isn't a good idea that, yeah, he takes a couple, maybe a second or so, too long to gain his speed. It's too slow. If you compare it to Sonic Adventure 1, for instance, the speed up on a straight surface is smoother than this game. Again, this game does it well, however you do notice it's not quite on par. And similar to that, the other thing that this game slightly gets wrong is turning when jumping, especially at slow speeds. Shadow Generations, hands down, better than Forces, Frontiers, any of the Boost games at turning around. It's so close to the adventure game that you notice the difference if you've played Adventure. This is still a positive at Shadow Generations that it's that close, but very rarely I would notice slight difficulties trying to do a 360 degrees turn at slow speeds when jumping. Outside of that specific interaction though, the jumping controls were basically spot on. So these small things with the acceleration at slow speed and the ability to turn in a jump at low speed, they're already good, but if they're tweaked a little bit more, they're basically the same as the adventure games, which had the best control in 3D space. So this game has pushed its 3D to the best we've seen in a long time, while still making its 2D sections arguably the best we've seen in a long time as well. I've seen a lot of opinions that the 2D stages here are actually some of the best, and whilst I don't know if I'll go that far, I definitely prefer them to the 2D stages in other games. What I think would be very interesting at this point is hearing what your thoughts on this subject matter are, because 2D and 3D have been a hot topic of debate for the Sonic franchise, but now everyone seems to think that they've at least done a good job for both of them. Have your opinions on what you want to see in the games changed, or has your tolerance changed? Are there things you think they still need to include, or do you have a couple small tweaks like I had before you consider it to be genuinely fantastic? Please do let me know in the comments down below, and thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you have a great day, and to see you next time. This is the Mighty Emperor, signing off.